I stepped outside, leash in hand, ready to take my dog for a walk and squeeze in a quick jog. As I watched the neighbors start their cars and head off to work, I let out a deep sigh. I didn't have an office to rush to anymore. Ever since my business went under, I'd been buried in debt and stuck at home, trying to breathe life back into something that had once thrived but now just kept slipping through my fingers. The world kept spinning like nothing had happened, while I stood still, unsure of where to go next. That's when I noticed my neighbor, Mike, heading out from his spotless driveway. Mike ran a booming car import company and always had some flashy luxury car parked out front. Today was no different. He strutted over with that same smug grin he always wore. "Morning, man!" he called out, way too chipper for someone just heading to work. I gave him a tight smile, not really in the mood, especially when I saw that grin of his stretch even wider. "Another relaxing day off, huh?" he said, a little too pointedly. His words stung, but I kept calm. "Every day's got its own battle," I replied evenly. He just chuckled and walked off, tossing back a, "Gotta get those cars moving." I watched him go, telling myself not to let his passive-aggressive jabs get under my skin. Some people just can't help themselves. Going back inside used to be a comfort. Now, it felt more like stepping into a storm. Not because of the house itself, but because of who was inside. My wife, Rachel. Rachel worked as an insurance agent, and ever since my financial world crumbled, she'd become distant, colder. The change wasn't subtle. The playful text inviting me home early for dinner, the spontaneous movie nights curled up on the couch, all of that had faded. Our conversations had shrunk down to basic logistics, nothing more. What used to be a warm, loving home now felt like a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. I tried to reach across the gap one day by bringing up how she used to call me during the day just to check in. She didn't even look up from her paperwork. "Things change," she said flatly. Then, one evening when she got home, I finally gathered the nerve to try again. I couldn't shake how much I missed her, missed us. I quietly brought up our first anniversary, the candlelit dinner on the rooftop, our slow dance under the stars. Rachel looked up from her laptop, her expression unreadable. "Why are you bringing that up now?" she asked. I shrugged. I miss what we had. I miss being close to you." She let out an audible sigh, snapped her laptop shut, and said she didn't have time for this kind of talk. She was slammed with work and couldn't afford to sit around reminiscing just because I was home all day. I told her I just wanted to spend time together, like we used to. Her eyes hardened. "I don't have the time for all this sweet talk. You're doing your thing, I'm doing mine. We'll talk when I'm less buried." "Okay," I said softly. "Whenever you're ready." As I walked away, the silence in our home felt colder than ever. Later, while walking my dog through the park, a flicker of hope started to spark inside me. Yeah, the business had failed. Yeah, things were rough. But this was just one chapter. One challenge. I gave my dog a pat and whispered, "We're gonna bounce back. One way or another." When I got back to the house, I found Rachel at her vanity, applying her makeup with careful strokes. Something about her reflection caught me, brought back flashes of how I used to feel when I first fell for her. I walked over with a soft smile. "You look beautiful," I told her gently. She didn't even glance at me. Just kept applying her lipstick. When she finished, she smiled at herself in the mirror and said, "I am beautiful." Trying to stay casual, I asked, "What time are you off tonight?" She paused for a second, then looked at me curiously. "Around 7, I think." "Why?" I gave her a wink. "No reason. Just wondering." Truth was, I had something special planned for tonight. I decided I'd cook dinner from scratch, nothing fancy, just something heartfelt. I even planned to grab a bottle of Rachel's favorite wine. It was a small gesture, but maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of fixing things between us. Rebuilding our marriage could be exactly the spark I needed to rebuild my career too. That thought kept me going. I spent the day tidying up the house with upbeat music playing in the background, hoping to bring back some of the warmth we'd lost. Every wiped counter, every dish washed, every trash bag taken out, it gave me a tiny sense of control, a flicker of pride. Once the place looked spotless, I grabbed my keys and headed to the store to pick up groceries for dinner. On a whim, I made a quick stop at the wine shop to pick up that rose she loved. The little bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and Pam, the woman who'd worked there forever, greeted me with a bright smile. "Hey, stranger! It's been a while. How've you been holding up?" she asked, clearly happy to see a familiar face. I gave her a half-smile. "I've had better days, Pam. But I'm getting by." I asked if they had a bottle of that rose Rachel always picked out. Pam raised her eyebrows with a teasing grin. "Ooh, planning something romantic tonight?" I laughed softly, trying to keep things light. "Something like that." Then Pam added, almost offhandedly, "Funny, Rachel was in earlier today. Picked up the exact same bottle." There was a beat of silence where I think we both realized she may have said too much. Her smile faltered slightly, and she quickly added, "Maybe she's planning a little surprise of her own, huh?" She cleared her throat and started wrapping the bottle up with practiced ease, trying to change the subject. On the drive home, my upbeat mood had faded, replaced with a whirlwind of questions. Was Rachel planning something too? If so, why buy the wine earlier in the day and not mention it? Was it for me? Or for something else? I shook the thoughts out of my head, tightening my grip on the steering wheel. I couldn't start spinning out over assumptions. Whatever was going on, I'd know soon enough. Back at home, I got to work. The house smelled amazing: garlic, rosemary, red sauce bubbling on the stove. For a while, the warmth of the kitchen and the smell of real food was enough to distract me. I lit some candles and set the table for two. Everything looked perfect. Then I looked at the clock. 7:45. Rachel was usually home by 7. Maybe she got caught up with work. I tried to brush it off, but that uneasy feeling had started creeping back in. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, hoping to see her name pop up. The only sound in the house was the ticking of the clock. Finally, around 8:30, my phone rang. Her ringtone. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Rachel's voice came through rushed and a little breathless. "Hey, babe. Where are you?" I asked, doing my best to sound casual. "I'm so sorry, Robert," she said quickly. "Something came up at work, an unexpected business trip. My boss insisted I go. I couldn't say no." I blinked, trying to process. "Okay, but couldn't you have left in the morning or something?" "I'm already on the way," she said with a sigh. "It's a big opportunity, Rob. It could open some doors for me." I took a breath. I didn't want to be the insecure husband, especially with everything I was going through myself. "I get it. I just wish you told me sooner." I know, she said, her voice hurried. "It all happened so fast. I really have to go. I'll call you when I can, okay?" I looked down at the dinner I'd prepared, the candlelight flickering gently. "All right," I said quietly. "Take care. Call me when you get a chance." "I will," she said softly. "I'll be back soon. Oh, and it might be a couple weeks. Not totally sure." Then the line went dead. I sat down heavily in one of the dining chairs, staring at the untouched plates. My shoulders sagged, the weight of it all pressing down. The trip made sense on paper, but I couldn't shake the memory of Pam saying she'd been in earlier. With that same wine? Maybe she just wanted a drink for the trip. Maybe she just didn't think to mention it. Maybe. I forced myself to stop spiraling. I'd cooked a good meal, and I didn't want to waste it. So I dished up a plate and carried it to the living room. The soft glow of the TV helped take the edge off, and I flipped through channels until I landed on a game already in progress. It wasn't much, but it was enough of a distraction. I leaned back on the couch, letting the familiar rhythm of the game settle my nerves. I even found myself laughing once or twice. At least until my wine glass ran empty. I wandered into the kitchen to top off my glass, and for a moment, The weight of the evening started to lift. I was beginning to feel a little lighter, like maybe I could just enjoy the meal and let go for a while. But as I walked past the study, something caught my eye, a faint glow from the computer screen. That was strange. It usually stayed off unless there were new notifications or someone had used it recently. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stepped inside and flipped on the overhead light. Maybe Rachel had left it on after one too many glasses of wine, I thought. I was just about to turn it off when a soft ding stopped me cold. A pop-up blinked in the bottom corner of the screen. Photos successfully synced. My eyebrows drew together as I leaned in. I clicked on the message. A spinning icon appeared, then a list of recently uploaded images. Every file had a timestamp from earlier that day, just a few hours ago. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked. The first photo started loading from the top down. And there she was, Rachel. Smiling wide. Sitting on someone's lap. My stomach dropped. As the photo continued to load, I recognized the man. It was her boss. Rachel was playfully leaning into him, her hand resting on his chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. They looked cozy. Comfortable. Familiar. My knees gave out and I sank into the chair, my hands gripping my hair. Everything I tried so hard to ignore, all the doubts I'd pushed down, were now screaming at me in neon lights. This wasn't just my imagination. It was real. I stared at the screen, unable to look away. That little sparkle in her eye, the way she tilted her head toward him, it told a story I didn't want to hear. I clicked on another image. Then another. Each one chipped away at me. They were at a fancy bar, clinking glasses, laughing, leaning in close to whisper. In one shot, he had his hand on the small of her back. In another, their foreheads were nearly touching as they laughed. It didn't look like work. It didn't look professional. It looked like a date. Everything I'd done to try and reconnect with her, the dinner, the wine, the damn candles, it all felt like a cruel joke now. I felt the betrayal crawl up my throat, thick and sour. I couldn't sit there any longer. I left the living room, tossed the wine aside, and went looking for something stronger. Outside, the rain had started. A steady drizzle soaked the streets, but I barely noticed as I grabbed my coat and walked toward the liquor store, hands stuffed in my pockets, heart in pieces. Every step echoed with old memories. I remembered the early days, when we used to plan a future full of dreams. Back when my business was thriving, and I had promised her a shiny new Mercedes. I'd said it with pride, with certainty. But I never made good on that promise. Had I let her down too many times? Was that why she drifted? Or had it always been inevitable? Maybe it wasn't one thing. Maybe it was 1,000 small disappointments that added up over time. By the time I stepped into the store, I was soaked to the bone. Rain dripped from my hair and pooled around my shoes. Pam was behind the counter again. She took one look at me and her smile faded. "Hey, Robert," she said softly. "You doing okay?" My voice came out hoarse. "Whiskey, please." She tilted her head, concerned. "Are you sure that's what you need? I mean, if you want to talk." I cut her off, shaking my head. "Just the whiskey." She nodded without another word, placed the bottle on the counter, and rang me up. I offered her a tired smile, grabbed the bottle, and walked out. I didn't wait until I got home. The first few swigs burned going down, but I didn't stop. The buzz hit fast, so did the emotion. The whiskey stripped away the last bit of composure I had left. I stumbled a little, laughing bitterly to myself as I walked. Then I started talking out loud, my words slurring together. "Hey there," I muttered to a passing stranger, pointing at no one. "You know my wife? She's out living it up with her boss right now. And me? I'm here. Celebrating." I let out a bitter laugh, my words dripping with sarcasm. "Yep, just me and my one-man party," I muttered to no one in particular. As the minutes passed, my words became more jumbled, slurred beyond recognition. I started humming and half-singing a song that had played in the house earlier, the one I'd queued up for a romantic dinner for two. My voice cracked as I tried to follow the melody, sometimes staying on key, other times way off. The sadness in my tone was raw, almost unbearable, like the tune itself was echoing back the ache in my chest. Somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't have the whiskey bottle anymore. Maybe I finished it. Maybe I dropped it. Either way, I decided I needed another. So I turned around and started stumbling back toward the store, mumbling nonsense to myself, digging into my pockets for cash. Empty. I patted my jeans, jacket, nothing. My wallet was gone, or maybe I never grabbed it in the first place. That's when I noticed an older man a few feet away, just standing there under the streetlight, watching me. He had a weathered face, glasses perched low on his nose, and a worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked concerned. Curious. Maybe a little amused. "What?" I barked, my words clumsy. "You got something to say?" The man blinked in surprise at first, but I guess he could see the pain behind the anger. My whole posture shifted. I dropped the tough guy act, my voice cracking as I added, "I'm sorry, man. I need a drink. I need it bad. You got, I don't know, $100? Anything?" The man gave a quiet sigh, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a few crumpled dollar bills. "This is all I got," he said, holding them out. Even drunk, I could see he meant it. The guy didn't have much, but he was still offering to help. I took the bills with shaking hands and mumbled, "Thanks. Seriously." Then I looked at him and tried to smile. "Wanna come with me? We can share it." He shook his head gently. "You've had enough, son." I was about to argue, to tell him to mind his own business, but then the nausea hit me like a brick wall. I doubled over and threw up right there on the sidewalk, the cold mist clinging to everything, the wet pavement reflecting the streetlights like a broken mirror. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I stumbled over to a brick wall, leaning against it, eyes squeezed shut. The old man stood nearby, worry etched across his face. "You live around here?" he asked softly. All I could mutter was, "I just went asleep." He looked down the street, empty, quiet except for the patter of rain, and said, "This ain't the kind of place you want to pass out. Come on. Let's get you somewhere dry." I don't remember much after that, just that he put my arm over his shoulder and practically carried me. We crossed under a bridge, and beneath it was a rough little shelter, just some tarps and scrap wood, but it was dry, and it felt safe. That night, I passed out to the sound of raindrops tapping against plastic. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. Birdsong floated through the air, and I blinked against the soft light. My head throbbed, dull, heavy, the kind of hangover that makes you question your life choices. The world around me was blurry, unfamiliar. I pushed aside the curtain and stepped out of the makeshift shelter, groaning as I tried to get my bearings. Down by the river, the old man was already awake, casting a fishing line into the water with practiced ease. His back was straight, his movements calm, his hands weathered but steady. He looked over and smiled like we were old friends. "Took you long enough," he said with a chuckle. "We had a wild night." I stared at him, baffled. How'd I end up here? He introduced himself as Jim Hughes and explained that I'd passed out in the middle of the sidewalk last night, talking nonsense and shouting about my wife. He said it didn't feel right to leave me there, so he brought me somewhere safe. My face flushed with shame. "God. I'm sorry, Jim. I must have been a mess." Jim leaned back, the morning sun catching in his silver hair. "You were loud," he said with a smile. "But not the worst I've seen. Just heartbroken." I nodded slowly, the memories flooding back. "Yeah. I've been going through a lot." Jim's gaze softened, and his voice turned thoughtful. "We all get lost sometimes. Grief's a heavy thing. But time's funny. It doesn't heal everything, but it sure dulls the pain." He motioned toward a small tin plate by his side. "You hungry?" I was just about to make some breakfast. I blurted out a half-joking request for something, anything, to drink, rubbing my temples from the pounding headache that had taken over my skull. Jim just chuckled, like he'd been expecting it. "Hang tight," he said. "I've got something better than whiskey." Soon, the air filled with the warm, savory scent of fish soup bubbling gently over a small fire. The aroma alone made my stomach growl. I watched as Jim moved with ease, chopping herbs and stirring the pot like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Smells amazing," I murmured, my voice still groggy. Jim grinned and gave me a wink. "Old family recipe. Perfect for mornings like this, when your brain's trying to claw its way back to life." We sat there together under the open sky, sipping the hot soup. The warmth settled into my chest, grounding me. For a moment, everything felt still. Peaceful. Jim broke the silence with a bit of advice. "Try not to let the bottle do your thinking, kid. It's a hard habit to break once it gets a grip." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. "I get it now." He looked at me for a long beat. "Sometimes people hurt us in ways we don't understand. And the only way through it is to let go. Walk forward. Not back." There was a weight behind his words, something personal. I saw it in his eyes, the kind of sorrow you don't just read in books. But I didn't push. He didn't need questions. He'd already given me more than I could ever repay. "Thanks, Jim. For everything," I said, standing up slowly. I should head home. Before I left, something near the edge of the shelter caught my eye: beautifully carved wooden figures, each one detailed with care. A tiny cabin, a bird in flight, a pair of clasped hands. "You make these?" I asked, genuinely impressed. Jim's eyes lit up, and he nodded. "Yeah. Did it for years before, well, before life changed. It keeps me sane. They're incredible," I said, and I meant it. He just smiled. "Takes patience. But it's honest work." That stuck with me. Patience. Honest work. I smiled back, feeling something shift inside me, like maybe the foundation hadn't crumbled completely. Maybe there was still something to build on. When I got home, I went straight to the computer. I started emailing every furniture store in the city. I had sketches, designs, even a few photos of my old work. For the first time in months, I felt that fire again. 1 week later, full of momentum, I went back to the riverside shelter to check in on Jim. I brought coffee and a little breakfast, thinking maybe we'd share a quiet morning. But when I got there, the place was empty. Only Jim's backpack and his jacket rested on the ground, laid out carefully like he just stepped away for a minute. "Jim?" I called out, peering around. No answer. Maybe he'd gone fishing again, or off gathering firewood. Still, a strange knot formed in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. As I turned to leave, a sharp rock lodged in my shoe. I stopped, let out a frustrated sigh, and sat down on a nearby bench to shake it out. But as I bent forward, my eyes caught movement in the distance. A lone figure. Standing too close to the edge of the bridge. My breath caught. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Jim!" I yelled his name, panic flooding me. I jumped up, yanked my shoe back on without even tying it, and sprinted toward him. The sound of my footsteps echoed on the wooden bridge, each step hammering my chest harder than the last. As I got closer, I saw him more clearly, his shoulders hunched, his eyes cast down. And next to him, a rope. Coiled. Waiting. My voice cracked. "Jim, no, please!" He turned his head, just slightly, and looked at me. His eyes were red, brimming with tears that hadn't yet fallen. The pain in them hit me like a gut punch. I didn't hesitate. I slowed my steps and walked toward him carefully. Gently. I reached out and placed my arm around his shoulders, steady and firm. He didn't pull away. We stood there like that, just two broken men on a bridge, clinging to something neither of us could name. I felt his body tremble against mine. Then, finally, the tears came. Quiet at first. Then full. And I held on tighter. Because sometimes, what saves us isn't strength. It's being seen. I pulled Jim into a firm embrace, holding him tightly as the weight of everything pressed down on us. He shook in my arms, the tears finally flowing freely. "It's okay," I whispered close to his ear, steady and calm. "I'm here. We'll get through this. Together." We eventually sat side by side on the edge of the bridge, legs dangling, our breaths visible in the chilly morning air. The river below flowed quietly, steady and indifferent to the storm in Jim's heart. Little by little, he began to open up. He told me he'd served in the military years ago. Afterward, he landed a steady job at a food processing plant. "Wasn't glamorous," he said with a faint smile, "but it was honest work." He talked about his daughter, how he'd done everything he could to support her. She was his whole world. But then the plant downsized, and just like that, he was out of a job. Missed a rent payment. Evicted within a week. "Everything just fell apart," he said, rubbing his forehead with both hands. His voice cracked as he described how fast it all happened. He had no safety net. Nowhere to go. He moved back to his hometown, thinking maybe, just maybe, luck would find him there. But with no permanent address and a history of job loss, doors slammed in his face. Even interviews ended before they really began. He was picked up a few times for sleeping in places he shouldn't have been. Then he got sick, seriously sick, and couldn't get help. No insurance. No one to call. He eventually crashed in an old friend's van for a while, until even that disappeared. Then one day, while walking along the river, he found the shack under the bridge. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jim's voice dropped as he spoke about his daughter again. "She probably thinks I just walked away," he whispered. "Like I just stopped caring." He hadn't spoken to her in years. My chest ached listening to him. This gentle, humble man who had treated me with nothing but kindness had been carrying all that pain alone. As we walked back to the shack, I turned to him, my tone warm but firm. "Life's dealt you some hard hits, Jim. But you're not facing them alone anymore." He blinked at me, eyes wet but wide with surprise. I could see the flicker of something returning, something like hope. I had an idea. A wild one. But maybe, just maybe, it could work. "You've got talent, Jim," I said. "Those carvings? That craftsmanship? You're the real deal." He looked at me like I'd just spoken in another language. "I want to start something," I continued. "Something small. A furniture business. Maybe we start with cradles. Handmade. High quality. Local." Jim's mouth opened slightly, stunned. You'd trust me with something like that?" I smiled. "I wouldn't have said anything if I didn't." The next 2 weeks were some of the best I'd had in years. The sound of saws and hammers filled my garage. We worked late, laughing over takeout and cups of cheap coffee. Every cradle we made told a story, of healing, of purpose, of starting over. Jim wasn't just staying with me. He became family. When we finished our first batch, I loaded the cradles into my truck and took them to local furniture shops. One store owner examined the detailed work with wide eyes. "Who made these?" I grinned. "A friend of mine. Jim. He's got real talent." Orders started rolling in fast. People loved the uniqueness, the handmade care in every curve and joint. Our garage quickly became too small for what was growing into a real business. Then one afternoon my phone lit up. Rachel. My heart skipped for a second. Her name still had that effect. Her voice was cool but familiar. She mentioned delays, hinted that she might be abroad for longer than expected. When I asked what was going on, she paused. I could hear her breathing on the line. Then she cleared her throat. "I need a loan." I didn't respond right away. After everything, her silence, the betrayal, the lies, I wasn't sure what she expected. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "But I can't help you with that." She exhaled sharply. "Fine. Forget it," she snapped. And the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a while, but I didn't feel regret. Not this time. Jim and I were building something real. The business was taking off, and it was only getting bigger. The demand was more than we could keep up with. Our little workshop needed room to grow. A new beginning was unfolding. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine to shape. I remembered something my friend Mark had mentioned during a phone call a few months back. He owned an old barn just outside of town. It had been sitting empty for years, solid as a rock and surprisingly spacious. It sounded like the perfect next step for our growing business. The transition was smooth. We moved in within days and even brought on a couple of local guys, young, eager, and hungry to learn. They weren't just there to collect a paycheck. They wanted to be part of something meaningful. It felt good to teach again, to lead. Back home, I started handling more of the administrative side from my little home office. And one night, after a long day at the barn, Jim walked into the house to something unexpected. There I was, moving around the kitchen like I actually knew what I was doing. The table was fully set. Real plates. Cloth napkins. The smell of baked chicken and rosemary potatoes filled the place. Jim froze in the doorway, confused, clearly trying to figure out if he'd walked into the wrong house. I looked over my shoulder with a grin. "Don't just stand there, Jim. Dinner'll be ready in a minute." Still puzzled but grinning, he sat down and watched me as I moved around the kitchen. Eventually, I joined him, pulling off my apron and taking the seat across from him. "I hope you're not mad," I said, eyes gleaming. Before he could ask what I meant, the doorbell rang. I stood up quickly and went to answer it. A moment later, a young girl stepped into the entryway, wide-eyed and unsure. Behind her was a woman, calm, graceful, and quietly emotional. I turned back toward the dining room. Jim had risen to his feet, his face shifting from pale to stunned in a single breath. His knees wobbled as he stepped forward, and then, "Dad," the woman whispered. "Mindy?" Jim choked out. And in an instant, they were in each other's arms. They held each other like they were afraid to let go, like years of pain and silence could somehow be erased in a single, bone-deep hug. Behind them, the young girl looked on, unsure but curious. "That's Kristen," Mindy said softly, smiling through her tears. "Dad, that's your granddaughter." Jim turned, eyes full of wonder, and looked at the little girl. Kristen gave a small wave. I clapped gently to break the moment. "Dinner's ready, everyone." We all gathered at the table. The clinking of silverware and soft conversation filled the space. Mindy opened up about her long, difficult search. She told us how her obsession with finding her father had put a strain on her marriage, how it eventually ended because of it. But tonight, at this table, surrounded by laughter and the glow of rekindled love, she finally felt peace. And so did I. Mindy and Kristen ended up staying for a while. Their presence brought a lightness to the house. Kristen's laughter echoed through the rooms like a melody the walls hadn't heard in years. And Jim, he was healing. You could see it in his eyes. One evening, while I was buried in paperwork, I heard the front door creak open. It wasn't Jim or Mindy. They always announced themselves with a cheerful, "We're home." I leaned out from the office and saw her. Rachel. She looked worn out. Shoulders slumped. Her eyes ringed with fatigue. She let out a long sigh, dropped her bag, and stretched like she hadn't slept in days. "That trip was something else," she muttered to herself as she plopped onto the living room couch. I watched from the hallway, a knot forming in my stomach. Her sudden reappearance felt like a gust of wind that reopened a door I'd been trying to keep shut. I hesitated, then walked over slowly, sitting down beside her, leaving a respectful space between us. She looked at me, trying to read my face. "Look, Robert. I know things have gotten complicated," Rachel began, her voice hesitant. But I raised a hand, cutting her off before she could say more. "Did you have your photo sync turned on?" I asked, my voice low and calm, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't hide. She looked confused for a second. Then it hit her. Her face paled, and her eyes widened. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump forming in my throat. "I saw the pictures, Rachel. I didn't need to see more than a few to understand." She scooted closer on the couch, her eyes suddenly wide with desperation. Robert, please. Just listen. It's not what it looks like, we were just. I stood up sharply. I wish I hadn't seen them, I said, my voice rising with the weight of what I'd buried. But now that I have, there's no going back. I can't pretend this didn't happen. I won't pretend everything's fine. Her voice cracked as she reached out toward me. Robert, please. Just give me a chance to explain. I shook my head, jaw clenched. I think it's best if you leave, Rachel. Please. Her calm cracked, frustration spilling out. So that's it? You won't even hear me out? Fine. But just remember, no one will ever stand by you the way I did. No one will love you like I did. The front door creaked open before I could respond. Jim stepped in, paused mid-stride as he caught the tension in the room, then quietly stepped back out and closed the door behind him without a word. Rachel's posture shifted. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes dimmed. Whatever fire she had burned out. I'm sorry, she whispered. Truly. I nodded. I believe you. But you still need to go. She didn't argue this time. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, and stepped outside. Kristen was on the lawn, chasing after a butterfly, giggling like only a child can. When she spotted me, she darted over and threw her little arms around my legs. I bent down, hugging her gently. Rachel paused by the sidewalk and looked back. She saw us, me, crouched there with Kristen wrapped around me. Her eyes lingered for a moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. It wasn't just regret. It was realization. Maybe for the first time, she saw that someone else already had stepped in to offer me what she couldn't: love, warmth, and a future rooted in honesty.